Hello, everyone, and welcome to Office Hours. As always, this is where we gather every single day to help anyone and everyone learn about modern web-based production. It's where you can submit your questions about media creation and distribution in all of its forms. You can do that 24/7. One way to do that is by using the QR code, which I'm about to bring up on the screen. This QR code allows you to kind of get into the system. And if you've never been here before, really this entire show is driven by your votes on the questions and your questions. So, if you go to the website and kind of follow the breadcrumbs, you can get into the system. You can use this QR code, or you can use the Mukana system, which allows you to go in and not just put your questions in, but vote on those questions. And the rules around here are simple. The questions that get the most votes, we get to quicker, and we talk about in more details. So it's important for you to do your voting. If you're watching on YouTube, you can use any of these systems, and one way or another, welcome to Office Hours. It's time to dive into our first question of the day. So, Jason, what do we have on tap?
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania writes in, I'm having problems with a MacBook Air M2. The built-in keyboard is going wonky. On some keys, nothing happens when pressed. It is mostly on the right hand. IOKLU. How do I fix that?
And I am not seeing that.
I think you're on a different folder, Jason.
Yeah.
You're on the voting queues, I think.
I'm seeing a question from Scott Wasserman in Detroit.
I think, Jason, I think
Sorry.
you're on the wrong tab
Yep,
there.
that's right. Okay, here we go. John Wasserman in Detroit, Michigan writes in, I'm filming and editing a theatrical play that will later air on a local PBS station. Their specs request 1080i at 2997 file. What are the best practices for filming? Film in 3840 by 2160 at 2997p. Is it okay to convert the final edit to 1080i at the end?
There you go, Scott. Your first question. Alex Lindsay is going to help you out. Alex, dive in.
You definitely can, but you won't give them exactly what they want. Obviously, television stations are kind of local television stations are used to getting what they get. But what you really want to be doing is shooting 5994. So the reason for that is that when you see 2997 and it's interlaced, it's actually 60 fields. And so it's two different fields that are interlaced together. So you're not going to get the same motion if you convert 2997 to 1080i. 1080p 2997 is going to be half the effective frame rate of that interlace. So you want to be kind of careful of that. So typically when we're asked to deliver a 1080i file, we'll shoot it at 5994. Now you can decide, the only thing you really have to decide there is where you put the motion blur. So typically with a 5994, you would have that motion blur a little bit faster, but what I would do is have your motion blur at 1/60th of a second, so 180 degrees, and then set it to 5994. That's a very, at 5994, that's a slower than what you would normally have, but that's like it's equivalent of a 360 degree shutter, but I think it will look better. Then you can have your 2997. It'll all look the way it did before. The only challenge that you have is you're now, if you're shooting 3840, you're now in a 12G world. So the question is can you manage the 12G signal all the way through, or do you need 2160? So that's if you're only shooting the higher res frame because you want to use it later, then you just may have to think about whether you can do 12G. But if you will get the same, if you're able to shoot 12G, you will get the same effect. It'll look exactly the same as if you'd shot 2997 in the first place. And you have 5994 if you want it. But more importantly, the 1080i will convert properly. If not, just run it through a converter and let it do its thing. It's not gonna look as good. That's the best practice, but it may not be the one that you can do. And so otherwise, the 3840 by 2160 2997 will convert to I. It just won't look as smooth.
Let's go to the next question.
Mariela Shusha Mariela in Wablo writes in the latest versions of Zoom Workplace, when we pin a participant to a second monitor full screen, it is no longer full screen. There's a black bar on the top with the Zoom Workplace logo. Is there any way to remove that or go to the actual full screen?
Alex, have you figured out how to take this back?
Yes, absolutely. There's a great way to do this. It's called Zoom ISO. They're like the Zoom ISO is built for this. This is exactly what it's designed to do. So you're going to want, you're not going to find a debris-free way to do this other than Zoom ISO. But Zoom ISO is going to give you the raw frame rate, the raw frame that actually, in my opinion, looks better than the screen scrape in all ways, shapes, and forms. Better frame rate, better color, better reproduction all the way out, and it will not have any. But that's where the focus is, to make sure that you have a way to do that. It's probably the only conference app that does that, that gives you that. And I guess Teams will give you and does Teams still do the NDI thing? I don't know anybody doing production in Teams. So anyway, but outside of that, that's the way to get a full frame out.
There you go. Let's head off to the next question.
From the QR code, Gene J. Anthony in Sokoke, Illinois writes in, the panel recommended an omni pickup pattern for the Countryman ISOMAX. Why is this the best choice for a semi-treated environment over a cardioid? It seems that this would be more likely to pick up unwanted room noise.
Courtney Gooden's going to help you out here. Courtney?
Well, in the design of the ISOMAX Countryman, if you take a look at it, it's a side address microphone, but omnidirectional in pickup. So you look at the element itself is right there in the middle, and it's flat and it's facing forward. So if you're using this as a lavalier, which is what it is, you want to put it on the chest and probably either face that out or face that in. It's designed to be skinny so that it doesn't take up a lot of room. That element would be facing outward. So it has a omnidirectional pickup, because if it was a cardioid, it would be picking up pointed away from the speaker, away from their chest and away from their mouth. So you want to have an omni pickup in this case, in this particular microphone. It's designed that way to minimize clothing noise. So if you hide it underneath clothing, that particular design has plastic all the way around, and that the little grid that covers the element, the pickup element, is not exposed to cloth, because it has little barriers all the way around it. And a lot of times you'll even mount that microphone with the element facing in towards a vampire clip or something, so that there's a little gap of air between that front element and the back clip, which is maintained all the time, so that clothing can't close that gap and muffle the sound. So it creates a method of getting a microphone pickup without it being muffled by being laminated between clothing. So, and the isolation between the room noise in an omnidirectional pickup is just get it closer to the mouth, but not in the shadow of the chin, to get your maximum signal-to-noise ratio of the voice versus the reflection from the room.
Everything Courtney said, I would support 100%, having wired people with many of these many times over. I will say there's another thing that we don't generally use tight or directional patterns on lavaliers, because it's often necessary not to mount them dead center, but to put them on a shoulder or something like that. And then you get what I used to call the Tonight Show issue, which is where you're talking to the host, everything sounds great, but as soon as you reach over to talk to somebody else, the entire nature of the sound changes. So an omni capsule mounted center is ideal, but if you have an omni capsule and you need to put it on one shoulder or another or somewhere outside of the direct mouth pattern, it's still going to work just fine. So everybody kind of generically uses those unless you're in a really weird situation. And sometimes if you're in that weird situation and you just need maximum signal-to-noise method, we use a headset so that it sits at the corner of the mouth, and no matter where they turn, that distance is maintained. Let's go on to the next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, what does it mean when a product is TAA compliant?
Oh, Courtney, do you have a thought?
Yeah, it means it complies with the Trade Agreement Act of 1979, which was an act passed by Congress that ensures that government purchases, this is for items that are sold to the government under GSA contract. So if you want to sell equipment to the government, you have to put it up for bid under a GSA contract. And your products have to be TAA compliant, which means basically to comply with that act, they have to be mostly made or assembled or modified in the United States. So it's to kind of prevent people from just selling to the government and importing items directly from foreign countries and slapping their name on them. So you have to substantially modify, the product has to be substantially modified or created or manufactured in the United States to be TAA compliant.
Next question.
John Foltz in Selinsgrove, Pennsylvania writes in, I'm having problems with a MacBook Air M2. The built-in keyboard is going wonky. On some keys, nothing happens when pressed. It is mostly on the right hand, IOUKLU. How do I fix that?
Courtney's going to start us off. Courtney, what do you think?
IOUKLU. Yes. It depends on how handy you are and whether your M2 is still under warranty and whether you have Apple Care for this. If you have Apple Care, take it back and let them replace the keyboard. If you're handy, what this sounds like is probably a connector. A single pin on that connector is wonky or dirty. If you look at the keyboard here, there's a single connector and it has multiple pins here. And the keyboard is scanned in areas like there's one wire that serves a collection of keys in a certain area that is scanned, and it's scanned by another. And it's a complex scanning situation, but there's a multi-conductor cable that will serve those keys. And if one pin gets dirty or becomes disconnected or wears out, then you will lose a number of keys because that one pin has come loose. So a solution is either replace the keyboard, or if you're handy and you're out of warranty and you don't have Apple Care, open it up, pull that connector out, spray a little gook on it to a contact cleaner and stick it back in again and see if that fixes your problem. It may fix your problem. Otherwise, you can replace the keyboard. And you can order replacements online.
Excuse me, Courtney. I tried to cut you off there. Alex.
Unless you're as technical as Courtney, I would not touch your computer or have an unauthorized person touch your Mac under any circumstances. It is the level of precision and fitting that Apple does with these. Unless you go, it's just a set of tools that you don't have to do this. There's tools that Apple built to take these things off, and none of them are generalized or something you can just pick up at the hardware store. So the issue that you have is you will not be able to get it out and put it back in the way it was before. So hopefully with an M2, if you have Apple Care, you'll be able to take it in. They'll replace it with those tools, or take it to an authorized Apple dealer. If you don't take it to Apple itself, do not take it to an unauthorized dealer, and do not try to do it yourself unless you are extremely technical and have the tools that are required to actually do this properly. Because I speak from experience of, I can do this. And I used to do a lot of building and doing things, and it's just that it'll never be the same. Like, it's not that it won't work. It'll just be like it'll be a little shifty, and it just won't ever quite come back together the way you thought it would. And that's one of the costs of buying Apple products is they're put together in incredibly high tolerances, and without the right tools, they will not come back the way that the way you had them before.
Courtney, you want to get back in?
In a follow-up, iFixit doesn't make the tools for doing this, and the videos on how to do it. So
I would say what I think of iFixit. I would say what I think of iFixit, but I'm not allowed to swear on the show.
Okay.
But they are full of something that is
that's one of the things that they do, and the Right to Repair Act. They support you 100%. But just be prepared to, if you're not under warranty or haven't paid for Apple Care, as I said, be prepared to pay far more than is necessary to fix that 10-cent part.
Yeah, but there's a probably apocryphal story about the early days of Apple when somebody brought one of the products to Steve Jobs and said, this is as small as we can make it, and he dumped it in the aquarium nearby. He said, see where all that air is coming out? Get rid of that. All that empty space. I agree with you both in a certain thing. There are classes of repairs I still think you can take a shot at, but it's getting increasingly thin because, as Alex said, the amount of consolidation inside there's really no spare millimeter anywhere in these devices. And if you take the top off and you get in there, you will often be faced with I don't even know where to start. Some things are glued down and required heat. iFixit does put those things online, but I have had, exactly as Alex says, some situations where even though I can see the steps, I just can't execute them because they take way more time and patience than for them to just switch out a module. So
I have to say that iFixit is they are doing the wrong thing. Like they are, when it comes to Apple products, they're telling people they can do something that they can't do, and they're actually damaging people's machines. I'm really upset about that company. You know, like it's, you know, they are, I get that they're little
Apple
radicals.
who designs their products not to be repaired.
Then go buy a PC. Like the thing is, if you buy a Mac or you buy an Apple product, and you did, so there you go. If you want to be the person that repairs your machine, do not buy an Apple product. Like they're not the right company to buy from. So don't buy it. But if you buy it, you're buying into an ecosystem that is extremely tightly wound, and it is very high precision, and that's what you bought. And if you don't like it, then buy an Android or a PC. Just go buy those. But if you're going to buy an Apple product, that's the game you're playing. Is that somebody who knows what they're doing has to actually fix it, you know? And because it's highly precision. And the thing is that people tell people, oh well, they should be able to do all this stuff. It just never comes back the same. It never comes back. It never works the same way as it did before. It's dumb. It's dumb to try to take your Apple product. I'm not saying it's dumb to try to fix your own products. But if you have an Apple product made in the last 5 years, you should take it to an authorized dealer or the Apple Store, or sell it, or give it away, or whatever. But you should not do any of the other things. And iFixit trying to tell people to do this is damaging their machines. It's not whether I agree with iFixit or not. It's that they are encouraging people to do things that are going to damage their machines.
I will say my experience was that it was incredibly difficult and time-consuming, and I'm glad that I fixed the one bad speaker line on my wife's MacBook Air successfully, but it was a lot of work to fix that one little thing, and it surprised me. And I haven't gone back to fix anything since then. So let's move on to the next question.
Paul Walhus in Hot Springs, Arkansas writes in, how do you save backups of iPhones, iPads, M-series Mac Minis, etc. to a Synology NAS?
Nigel Dessau, give us some help.
Okay, so in reverse order, my M1 Max and Studios, I back up to my Synology by creating a shared directory on the Synology, and then using Time Machine to that shared directory. And that works really well, and it happens sort of invisibly in the background. My iPhones and my iPads, I do not back up to the Synology. I could do by plugging in that device, going to Finder, creating a hard backup onto my drive and copying it. Instead, I use iCloud because invariably if I want to recover one of those devices, I want to recover it from iCloud. Now, one other bonus thing I will give you. I recently lost one of my best friends, and I had a lot of texts from him that I didn't want to lose. And I found a piece of software called the Tansy iPhone Message Transfer. It's probably done irreparable damage to everything I own. I have no idea where I got it from. What it allowed me to do was to take a backup of my iPhone, put it onto my Mac, and read and convert every one of our text messages to a PDF. So I have a multi-thousand-page document of every text that we sent to each other over the last few years, and that was worth whatever that took.
Absolutely. Lovely story. Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, has anyone ever used UTM for macOS virtualization? It doesn't offer snapshots, but it is the first iOS virtualization app available, and he includes the website getutm.app.
Alex, do you have any experience with this?
It's not really an app. It's a side load. so it's a side load. It's a no. No, we haven't.
All right. Let's go to the next question.
Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada writes in, is there a best and worst boot when shooting a basketball game courtside or closer? Boots that won't mess up the floor.
Oh, you're talking footwear. We're
Yep.
all thinking startup devices. And all right, what's the least court messing shoes, Alex?
It depends on what you need it for. Number one is you're not going to spend much time on on the court when they're playing. So it's not you don't spend a lot of time on the court. At least that's been my experience going through those things. But I think that typically when people care about it, they'll tell you they don't want black surfaced rubber shoes. Like that's what they're usually concerned about is leaving dark marks on it. The other thing you may want to do is you can get harder soled shoes like work boots that just get a little slippery when they're on there. Typically, most of us have just worn tennis shoes and haven't had a problem with it. You also want to be careful of not leaving sound as you move around. You'll hear that with the basketball players. You don't want to be one of those. So those are the kind of things that we've considered in the past. But usually, all the time we spend on a court is before the show, not during the show. You will have a handful of handheld guys that'll go out and capture something that's there, but and I don't know what they use for boots. Robert Linkstrom says boots with spurs, which I don't agree.
No. Unless you're playing for San Antonio, exactly. You do not want to do that.
Exactly.
Let's go to Courtney.
Well, another thing is if you have to go out on the floor, there are throwaway disposable booties that you can get by the package. We use these all the time on green screen stages. So you put them over your street shoes and then you can walk out. It's going to be very slippery, so you got to be very careful. But they're just disposable paper, actually, covers for your shoes that have a little elastic around them that hold them onto your shoes. You slip them over your shoes and you walk out on the court. But then you got to remember, once you walk off the court and walk around in the stands and walk through all the dried Coke that is spilled in the stands, it's going to stick to that stuff. And you got to take them off and put a new one on before you get back on the court.
I agree with Alex. I think this is the time where you're looking for white, or a lot of them are like childhood eraser
just get
colored
you some Air
shoes.
Jordans. It's what they're wearing,
There you go. And do not wear old scuffy sneakers on a basketball court. People notice what you're wearing. The sneakerheads are brutal about judging your sneakers. So let's go into the next question.
Paul Walhus in Hot Springs, Arkansas writes, in the WNBA with YouTube TV has Multiview. I was watching 2 to 3 games and could switch between them. How would you prepare content for YouTube TV's unique capabilities?
This is going to be a challenge for all of us because we're getting more and more feeds. I mean, I remember back in the days, I'm old enough to where we had NBC, CBS, ABC, and maybe one local. And the number of channels I have access to is now unbelievable. To concatenate those into a single multi-view display or something like that, there are plenty of tools out there. And Alex raised his hand there. So, Alex, what do you use to do multi-view?
Well, I think that what he's talking about here with Multiview is that you're able to see. I thought it was 4 games at a time. I don't know if it was 2 or 3, but they've had YouTube TV during NFL. The NFL ticket has had 4 games for quite some time. So I think they're slowly rolling it out to more things. It's awesome. So basically, they group. Now you can't just. What would be really cool is if you could select which games you want to see all 4, but it's usually grouped into 4. And it is technically incredibly difficult to do because here's the problem with it is they're not sending the same signal to everyone. You have to get the signal from your local provider. So and then you have all the different games that are happening, and then you have all the different steps in the ladder. It is an incredible amount of encoding that YouTube does to make sure that this is all available to you. It's much more harder than it sounds, so it's an incredible experience. What happens is that at least what they had with the NFL ticket is you can see four games at a time. You can select which one you're listening to audio, so you can just select the one that you want to be listening to audio. Now you're able to listen to that audio there, from there, you can double click on it and it'll just take you to that game. So if you want to go full screen, you can go back. You can always go back into the quad view again. And when games are a little slow, it's nice because you can kind of just see what's going on and just leave it up there. And so it's a pretty great feature. I'm excited to see that they are opening it up to more markets, but I expect us to be able to see it a lot more over the next couple of years.
Yeah, with all the excitement about Caitlin Collins and the rest of the WNBA, and as well as they're doing now with all the major male NBA players saying, I love watching this more than I like watching our own games. And as David Brady said, they're doing something very complex. There's nothing for you to do. There's nothing you can do to prepare your content. They're just taking your content and putting it in a quad. so they're doing an incredible lift that probably cost, I don't even know what it cost to do that. They're doing an incredible lift to make that happen, but there's nothing for you to do to prepare your content for that, other than maybe think about whether your content is, if this was ever available on YouTube and you had to prepare for it, you might want to think about whether your content's readable at 1/4 size. Yeah, I wonder if the Roku type systems, and I know Courtney has a little experience with that, if you were able to aggregate from different streams. Now, in this case, WNBA, I'm sure, has contracts and they put it all in one place. But is it easy, Courtney, or is it difficult to when you're watching something like Roku to aggregate 2 or 3 different signals and see it? Is that part of the system?
I haven't had a Roku in quite a while. I'm using Fire TV and Google TV. It's not normally part of well, there's a picture-in-picture, I think, that you can use. You can put 2 things up.
2,
sometimes.
but not 4 or 5.
But not 4, and switch between them sometimes.
Yeah.
It's quite difficult.
Interesting. Thank you for that. And let's move to next question.
Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York writes in, I have a venue in need of ADA hearing assist. Some folks have asked me about hooking their hearing aids to a Bluetooth connection, but I've also looked at an FM transmitter from Listen Technologies. Thoughts?
Guy Cochran's going to help us out. Guy?
Yeah, our church uses the Listen Technologies. It's older technology with FM, but we stopped by the booth for Listen Technologies at Infocom, and they are coming out with some new technology as far as their own Bluetooth that can go farther than the Bluetooth that we're seeing on the market right now. So before spending a dime, I would go do a ton of research on their website and look at the Listen Everywhere, and the other product is called Listen Everywhere or Listen Wi-Fi that's coming soon. So these are the 2 that that I'd be looking at if I was to be speccing out a system for a new venue. So jump over to their website and definitely ask questions to a sales rep, because you're going to be spending a few bucks, and you definitely want to get the newer technology and not invest in the old.
Courtney Gooden?
Then what Guy said, if you want to go with the old technology, there are different forms. There's inductive loop, which work with most hearing aids, so they could pick it up. It's the design for an induction pickup that is used to listen on telephones. You build a loop and a power amplifier that drives that induction loop in the venue. However, they're susceptible. Those kind of listening devices are susceptible to SCR switching home from lighting systems, so that's why it's usually not a good choice. There's also the old FM style that you can get for fairly cheaply that has multiple receivers. These are in a VHF transmission range, and you have one transmitter and multiple receivers that you can get for around $300 that you can provide up to, I think with this one there was 6 receivers to people who request them in your venue. So that's a cheap way to get away with. But I didn't realize there was a multi-Bluetooth connection type Bluetooth broadcast that will address hearing aids, and hearing aids have to be able to receive Bluetooth, which maybe a lot of people may not have the latest, greatest hearing aids that are compatible.
Next question.
A QR code from Chris Dolan in Bradenton, Florida. Would you guys consider doing a program on the broadcast tech behind the Tour de France? That's what I'm doing right now on the same things that you do.
It's a big endeavor, that bicycle race. Alex, what do you think?
We'd love to get someone from Tour de France on. that would be awesome.
Yeah.
So if anyone from Tour de France, I don't say this. A lot of times people are watching the show that we don't know. So if you're working on the Tour de France, or you're connected to Tour de France, and you are interested in coming on the show, or if you have the ability to show stuff off, we'd love to have you. We will make space. So we'd love to have you. I'd love to know how you're doing that.
Absolutely. I do have a friend who used to work for the BBC and worked on the Tour de France, and it is a massive undertaking. He used to talk to me about, that's a multi-100-mile event, and the coverage of it. To get continuous coverage, they use so many different types of fixed position, and people in sidecars, and people on motorcycles, and people just everywhere. It's an astonishing process. So it'd be fascinating to look at. Next question.
Philip Olher in Canota, New York writes in, I would like to show YouTube comments on screen during my live stream. Is there a way to do this through OBS?
Alex, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the tools are specifically for OBS, but there are a variety of plugins that will grab that information, grab the information and feed it back in. I believe it's a custom build of OBS, and I apologize. I just don't know OBS well enough to know the answer to it, the specific one. But there is ways to do it. If your question is, if there is one, is there a way? Yes. Do I know what it is? No. But what that is it's someone who has to be able to have a they have to have a plug-in connection that comes back to that goes out and grabs those comments. It's actually a pretty difficult thing to do to build for. The issue is that YouTube has a arcane way of using tokens to grab onto comments, and so if you have a high volume of comments, it's really painful. So you really have to use somebody else's service who's gone through all the trouble with YouTube to figure out the token system. It's not something that even I want to do anymore. I just kind of gave up on it because it was just too much of a pain. So, but a variety of different companies, StreamYard, Restream, as well as some plugins for OBS, they've gone through the trouble of figuring this out.
Guy Cochran wanted to add something?
Yeah, there's a tutorial by one of our guests that's been on before, Elias, put up a H2R graphics tutorial that shows how to do this. So I'll put a link to the chat where he does the step-by-step.
And then the H2R goes into OBS?
Yeah.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, that'll work. I was trying to think of something internal to OBS, but and where can people find out more about H2R?
H2R Gear, or H2RGear.com, I believe is the website, or H2R Graphics.
All right. And we've had shows in the past. So for those of you who don't know it, they do maintain an archive of all of our past shows. So if you've been in the Mukana system in the back end and you have looked around the website, we've done 1,500 and, gosh, what's today? 1,500 and, I can't even see it up here. 1,500 and a bunch of shows. So we've covered a lot of these topics in the past, and you do have some access to that. So look around the website and do some searching, and maybe you'll find some of the times we talked about O2R graphics and some of these things, or John Baker. Let's move to the next question.
Brian Taylor, coming in from a QR code in Washington, D.C., writes in, is Apple leaving money on the proverbial Apple couch cushions by not producing a camera-only phoneless iPhone? I'm an iPhone user, but would buy an Apple Camera 15 in a heartbeat versus a used iPhone.
Interesting idea. Nigel, take us into your thinking.
So a couple of thoughts. First of all, I think most of us think we're buying a camera with a phone attached to it already, and are often coming really to the camera first. And so for Apple to split off all that technology, which I don't think it needs to, into a separate camera device, might actually mean they sell less phones, because you could now go buy a fancy Apple camera, if you believe it's fancier than the Google camera, and just buy a cheap phone. And I think for most people, and the question of good enough is going to come up later, I think, the camera is really good enough, and they're really going to keep going with putting as much as they can into the iPhone, because that's the primary device. I think the second thing to consider is that I was reading an amusing article about how somebody said the Vision Pro was failing because they're only going to sell 500,000 this year at $4,000 each. What is that? A failure of a $2 billion business in 1 year. I mean, the numbers aside, for companies like Apple, they've got to be able to hit enough scale in production to make it worth doing. And if they can't hit enough scale, it really isn't worth doing. So I don't think they'd get enough out of a separate camera, even if they wanted to.
Courtney, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm with Nigel. I think he called it. They'd rather sell a more expensive iPhone that has the same camera in it than a cheaper camera-only version of that. They used to do this. Remember, they used to sell the iPod Touch, which was basically an iPhone without the phone circuitry in it. They stopped doing that because they said, well, hey, we can sell the more expensive phones, so we're diluting our iPhone, our really lucrative iPhone market, which is where they were making most of their money, by selling a cheaper device that doesn't connect to the phone. So what's the point? So they eliminated the iPod Touch. And so now you have the phone. And the whole idea behind the camera in a phone is it's convenient because it's two things in one. You don't have to carry a separate thing around. If you want to take a picture, it's right there in your phone. Plus, the computational aspect of that camera is that they're doing a lot of computational work besides just capturing that image that's done by the processor in the phone. So you would have to have that processor in your camera. So it'd have to be a fairly smart camera and duplicate a lot of the stuff that's in the phone. So what would be the point?
Alex?
Yeah, my understanding of why they stopped selling the iPod Touches is because the sales numbers were really low. They weren't selling. They were just not selling enough to make it worth the SKU. And so I mean, you have to always, that's exactly what Nigel said before. It has to have a certain level of volume. And for Apple, for a phone device, it probably is in tens of millions have to be able to be sold. The problem also is that because they're using so much computational photography, they're not going to be able to take anything out of it other than the cell connection. It would probably be your, Apple camera would probably be maybe $100 less than your Apple phone. To take and you know what the funny thing is, they probably couldn't even take the cellular chip out. So what they would do is just turn it off. Like there's no in the grand manufacturing system of how they work to build a separate line of this, there's no way they would get enough volume to do it. Now, I do agree with also that we mostly just look at the phone. Like when I look at whether I'm going to upgrade in September, all I'm waiting for is the phone. And you can tell that Apple knows that because that's the last thing they talk about in their keynote is the phone, because they know that we'll all sit there and wait. And as soon as as soon as they tell us what's in the camera, we're all just going to leave. Okay, now I've made a decision about whether I'm buying one or not. So you're right that the camera is the most important part, but we've known that it's the most important part of your cell phone for the last, pretty much the last decade. And I will say that I was taking some pictures. My daughter had a birthday over the weekend, and I was taking some pictures of the cake and the things, and I just cannot believe what we can shoot with our cell phone. Like I just can't. Like it's really mind numbing of taking these dark photos. And there was a beautiful cloud shot outside the restaurant, so I shot the photo of it. And it captured it very well, better than most still cameras I've used. So it's just it really has come a long way. So, but anyway, I don't think that Apple wouldn't make any money at it. You wouldn't save very much money at it, and they would never sell enough of them to be worth it.
Next question.
Alexander Knight in Port Coquitlam, BC writes in, is there such a thing as a non-glossy neutral density gel?
Courtney.
No. Because the whole point of neutral density gel is something you can see a clear image through, so that you can put it on windows, for example, to knock down the light coming through the windows by a certain amount. If you want it frosted so that you can't see, so it's translucent but not transparent, then you could sandwich it with some Tough Frost or 216 or some other type of frosted gel that has a non-reflective surface, at least on one side. But no, normally, in order to pass light through it and see an image clearly through it as if it were a piece of glass, it's going to have to be shiny on both sides, because otherwise it would diffuse the light coming through as well as the light reflected from it. So, and the only solution to this would be like a fluoride coating, which they can't really do to gel.
Yeah, I think Courtney's got it. Next question.
Coming in from the QR code, Chester Sweeney in Las Vegas, Nevada writes in, when taking family video in the dining room where there is a big chandelier in the middle of the ceiling with lots of different jewel and gem type things, will this be a stationed camera light problem?
Not sure what that means, stationed camera light problem, but Alex, do you understand this, and what do you think?
It depends. It depends on whether the chandelier is going to be in the shot, whether it's not going to be in the shot, how reflective that chandelier is. A lot of times, chandeliers produce great light. You have a very large light source that tends to be soft, and it usually looks pretty warm, and it usually makes everybody look great. So if you keep it out of the shot, you're probably good to go. If you get it in the shot, it may be more problematic. But you may also see, the only thing to look at or what I would look for is whether some of the crystals produce kind of a disco light, kind of if they're producing any little highlights around them. So something hitting it directly, and especially the chandelier usually works really well with its own lights. If you have other lights hitting it, it may reflect these small little shards of light that come out of it. So that's the thing that you want to take a look at before you do it. But overall, oftentimes chandeliers kind of work like big softboxes. That's kind of what they're designed to do. And so it should be fine, but keep it out of the shot and look for those high reflection areas.
Courtney?
Yeah, and a lot of crystal chandeliers have little prisms on them, which generate little rainbows on the wall and stuff. So either that's a desired or a hated. If you don't like the look of the little rainbows, turn off the chandelier, and or if it's on a chain, get an S hook and lift it up out of the shot with that S hook so that it's not creating a problem with your shot or refracting the light through the little prisms or through the little jewels into the camera. Also, you can put a shade on your camera to make sure that any light that is refracted off that chandelier won't be pinging the lens of your camera and creating little flares as it moves in the wind.
Alex, you want to do a follow-up?
If it has one of the large crystals at the bottom of it that come down, don't have anybody else in the room. Go right underneath it with a laser pen and just hit it. It's really cool. If you hit it,
it's fun with light.
Laser
there's like lasers everywhere, and sometimes security doesn't think it's funny, but that's a whole other story.
I once had a shoot where there was a cupola over the room where we were shooting people, and at the start of the shoot, everything was fine, but then the sun went through that window and hit a crystal chandelier, and I had exactly what people are talking about, little tiny rainbows everywhere, and it was that prisms were not my friend. I had to send a PA up on the roof with a black piece of duvetine to cover that window that was hitting the thing. So, this is lighting. This is what you have to deal with. You have to look at your set and see where the problem's coming from and how do I fix them. Let's go to the next question.
Eduardo Augustine in Panama City writes in, should I stay on macOS Catalina? Is there any downfall to upgrade to macOS Monterey? Would it break something? My production box for my Fly kit is a Mac Mini late 2014 2.5 gigahertz dual-core Intel i5 with 8 gigs of RAM. I've been using it with macOS Catalina.
Alex Lindsay, what do you think?
I probably would not upgrade it if I had a Mac that old, I probably would not actually try to upgrade it. I think it's considered legacy at this point or whatever they call it. And I probably wouldn't even change it to Monterey. Was not a great year for Apple wine.
So anyway, it was like talking about wine here.
Monterey was not a great. It was
not a good vintage.
So I would probably not go. Not a good vintage of Mac OS. So I would probably stick with Catalina unless you have something that won't run on it. I would think hard about the fact that if you're able to afford putting a new Mac Mini in to replace that one, the difference in speed will. You might actually get whiplash. When you put it in, I mean, it'll be 20. It's not like it's going to be a little bit faster. The current one will run probably 20 to 30 times faster than what you're using from a 2014 Mac Mini. So it is a dramatic difference in what you can do with that Mac Mini. I have a whole bunch of M1s stacked up here to do that. So I would think about that. You can buy the M1s now probably for $350, $450, somewhere in that range. So they're not even that expensive. I have M1 with 8 gigs or whatever. But anyway, so I think that's. But anyway, so I think that I would probably not change it. I would probably not move anything in that computer. But unless there's some reason that you have to do it. But otherwise, I'd leave it there. But I would really think about getting a new Mac Mini at this point. The changes since that you bought that one are pretty dramatic.
Guy Cochran, your advice?
Yeah, same thing as Alex was going to say, and I'll just add that when I saw this question earlier, I thought there was something about the ATEM Extreme in there, and we just had this on a shoot last week where the tech had a laptop with Catalina on it, and he wanted to install 9.5.1 for the ATEM, and he couldn't. It said you have to upgrade your OS, and he's like, I don't have time for that at this Robodot set. And so I had to come in with my laptop and upgrade the ATEM. So there's a gotcha there. Like Alex said, I'd probably just drop the $350, $400 and find a used Mac Mini M1 because the difference in speed is pretty astonishing. And it's nice to have something like Mix Effect if you are running an Extreme. You can run it iOS apps on M1 Silicon, so that's another big benefit for $49.
Next question.
Greg Stovall in New York City writes in, I'm running an event in January, Zoom-based and hybrid. where there is a panel, 300 people in person and 150 online. Online hears everything via, I think it's EnGato feed from Zoom. How can we also hear the questions of those online in-house without bad feedback?
Okay. Alex is going to take you through some solutions.
So I think that the EnGato, I'm not sure what that is actually, to be honest with you, but I'm assuming it's some kind of feed that may create some delay. And if you are delaying the audio at all, which you may be doing as you go back into the feed, it's something you have to kind of think through now. So I'm not entirely certain of what that is, but what I will tell you is there are a couple things you want to think about. Mickey suggests hiring a competent A1, which is always going to be our suggestion. This is a tricky business of what you're talking about. It's not something that you just turn on and make it work. Here are the issues. If you just open up, most of the time, you can just turn on auto echo cancellation and it'll work. Where echo cancellation starts to fail is if you delay that audio. So if that audio is getting delayed on the way in, so when it comes back, it's not in the same sync. Then it just lets it through, so you get the full volume back. So it doesn't work nearly as well if it's delayed in any way, shape, or form coming back into the system that was sending out the audio. So that's the problem with that. And so there are a couple different ways to manage that. One, the easiest way to manage it is to put everybody on something like handhelds like SM58s. That is, most of the time you're not going to get the same level of feedback, and it's a little easier to manage. That's kind of triage. It's not perfect. It's just that it works a lot of the time. The way that we do it typically, and we've been doing this for a long time, is what we've done is use auto mixing. So we'll use something like a Dugan auto mix, and we have that auto mix going between what's coming in from Zoom and the mics that are on the stage. And so what happens is when someone's talking in Zoom, it pushes the mics down. When someone's talking on the stage, it pushes Zoom down, and it takes effort and expertise to make that work, and it works great. But you do have to have someone who actually, usually even with a skilled A1, because what happens for us is that oftentimes we're on the head end, we're on the place where the VIP is or something else, and we have to coach someone on how to do that. So that's So anyway, and now if it's EnGato, which is someone threw in there, Robert Green threw in the EnGato capture, then you may not have that. Now, if you have no delay going back into that computer and it's coming back out, the echo cancellation on Zoom will actually do a pretty good job. So but any kind of delay is where you get into trouble of things going back out. So anyway, those are some things to think about related to that.
Yeah, someone said maybe the EnGato capture hardware, the 4K capture hardware, something like that. But ping back in, Greg, and let us know if there's any more details you can give us to help us kind of get you in the right direction. Until then, next question.
Robert Sababity in Poland writes in, is it possible to switch a show on an ATEM switcher with different layouts of Zoom tiles, 3 up, 6 up, etc., being fed into the ATEM inputs? How do you sync the audio?
Guy Cochran, help him out.
Sure. Yeah, you would just take the display out. So over here where it says gallery outputs, you would have your 2 up and you would have your 6 up or whatever you wanted. You could see I was testing adding a chroma key green, so I could make this a transparent overlay. And they did just update this for NDI, so I haven't downloaded the new version, but that is another way of doing things. To get it into the ATEM, depending on what you have as far as a machine, a Mac Studio, you could choose just the HDMI outputs and grab onto those. And if you needed SDI, you can use a box, something like a Sonnet with a quad or something like that to pull those in.
Robert, hope that helped you. Next question.
Kyle Hammond in Chicago writes in, any good tech gear finds for Prime Day the next couple of days?
Gentlemen, start your credit cards. Nigel, what are you looking for?
So I keep a very carefully curated set of wish lists, and I've noticed at this point there is no discount on anything that I am wishing for, which I suspect to go. And as I look in Prime Day, it's mostly pickable bats and stuff that I don't really want. What I think will be interesting is I got an email this morning from Insta360, and they're starting to do, hey, we have deals on Amazon Prime Day, and there's $100 off a Link camera. So if you've been in the market for a Link, then you can get $100 off in Prime Day. So I'm not seeing a lot on the Amazon side. I get a bit overwhelmed, but I'm interested to watch those sorts of emails come in.
Courtney Gooden.
Yeah, I never see a lot of stuff that's the really expensive stuff that I like. Of course, the Amazon, I always get these, on Amazon Day, all of the Amazon products like the Echoes and the Ring doorbells now, you can get all for about 50% off, maybe 45 to 47% off, near 50% off on a lot of their manufactured products, the Show, the Ring doorbells, the Echoes, the Fire Sticks. You'll find all those about half price, which is the best deals you're going to find out there. Everything else, you might find 20%, 15, 20%, maybe 30% off on last year's versions if manufacturers are trying to clear the warehouses of the old version before they release a new version later this year for the Christmas shopping season. So you'll find some closeout products that are going to be lower price, so you can take a look at those. But as Nigel says, just look at the products you normally buy and see if they're discounted this week. And a lot of times they'll be discounted for the entire week other than just for these 2 days, which is today and tomorrow.
Yeah, having worked in or adjacent to retail in the advertising side of the world, generally these are not items that are gigantically popular because there's no reason for them to discount those. This tends to be products that they're overstocked on, or there's a new version coming out and they want to clear inventory. But if a thing works for you, it can be a good deal. So I wish you well, Kyle, in your search for that heavy discount on something you actually need and can use. Let's go to the next question.
Henry Ramos in Yonkers, New York writes in, did anybody catch the AR aspect of the Euro Cup halftime show with Shakira? Seemed to work all right, but thought the graphics selections were fairly cheesy, and then he includes the YouTube link.
Alex, did you get a chance to look at that?
I applaud the effort.
Damned with faint praise, as they used to say.
So here it is. This is it. I applaud them trying to do something. So they have. He gave us the time. There we go. Here's some. So this is the. Let's see here. So you can see it here. These are the little crystals here that are floating around in the sky.
3D jewels.
Yeah, I mean it's fine. I mean it. What happens is that this is what often happens is you have technologists who are excited to do something. They just didn't match them up with designers that could build something that you wanted to look at. So that's and that's the hard part is getting people. So you get somebody. Well, let's just give it and the challenge. Sometimes this moves the bar forward, but the challenge with doing it with only the technologists is that it doesn't get people excited. It's kind of like doing it halfway, which is that let's just throw something in there and see how it works. And the problem with doing things halfway is kind of like how you bake bread. A half-baked bread is still dough. So you just want to remember that people can look at it and go, well, that was a bad idea. I think that this was kind of a little above bad idea, but not good idea. It's kind of in between. So you can take it one way or the other. So it wasn't. I think it was implemented fine enough. I mean, the tracking looks okay. Just as Henry said, very cheesy.
Nigel,
a minor point. That's not the Europe. That was the Copa America Cup. I don't believe the Europe Cup had a halftime show. And thank you for bringing up the painful thought that England lost to Spain. But, we'll just move on.
Other than that, I have to say, this is, I'm not even going to say it. Let's just move on. Next question.
Zach Stallsmith in Chautauqua, New York writes in, I've been having trouble with NDI Screen Capture, stopping randomly and not restarting. I am running it with Raiden, I know, and have had trouble with it after upgrading to NDI 6. Anyone else experiencing this?
I wonder if he's talking about a Radeon card.
Radeon, sorry. No, that was my...
No, that's all right. I'm not even. No, I don't think it had the I in there. Anyway, Guy, help Zach out, please.
Yeah, I'm wondering if he has Wi-Fi on. That's usually a culprit because NDI could want to travel down the wrong avenue. To force it, what I like to do is add a secondary NIC. So you'll see on this system, there's 2 Ethernet connections. One is just my regular internet connection. Then I have another little dongle. And then from there, to force it, I actually use a discovery server. And that basically just says, hey, use this network, use So my internet one's a 198 dot whatever or 192.198 blah blah blah. With the Discovery server, I could then watch to make sure using what is this iStat menu to see where the NDI is flowing. So you might want to look at using, if you have a PC or whatever that's laying around, you can, it doesn't have to be a very robust PC. You can install a Discovery server on there, then use NDI Access Manager to point that NIC over there and force it to flow. And that way it's not trying to travel down two separate paths and then dropping out. So that's one way to get NDI to go the way that you want it to go on a secondary NIC and on a ideally through an M4250 switch. So I'd also want to look at where your entire route is going through.
Next question.
Douglas Carmichael writes in, Alex, you hit the nail on the head about Apple products being a, quote, tightly wound ecosystem. How will you change with the EU Digital Markets Act, Digital Services Act? How will that change? So,
that's all right. Alex, do you want to address this?
It's hard to tell. Hard to tell what will happen there. There's a lot of unknown factors there. The challenge that the EU Digital Markets Act has is that it's not a user-driven thing. The users don't care. So the thing is that the vast majority of the users, 95% of the users, probably 90% of them don't even know this is happening, and 95% of them don't care about any of the things that are in the Digital Market Act. You know, when people say, oh, well, now I can have my emulator and now I can have my side loading. I mean, that's like 1% of, I mean, if you look at, I think that Android, which has had it out for many, many years, I think is like 6% of their users have ever sideloaded anything ever. Like so that's not my number. That's actually a number that it's very, very rare. If you're watching this show, you're geekier, so you'll be like, oh, well, I do it all the time, but most people don't do that. And so the thing is that so the whole like the thing that's unknown is really whether that actually can build up on an Apple system, because the users are just not, it's not that they're for or against it. They will be if they start getting pushed off they're out of the Apple store. So where you'll see problems with this is if someone like Netflix or someone says you can only have Netflix on a separate store and you can't have it in the Apple store, then users are losing something. And then they'll get mad, because there's nothing, they don't see any added value. They just see, because most of this is all about, of course, money. It's the companies that are being, that are pushing for these side ones want to pay less, and it's really only really affecting, you have to remember that 87% of developers on the Apple store don't pay anything to Apple, just not the way that their apps work. And there's only a very small percentage of people that actually send anything. And the vast majority of them are sending 15%, and then there's a very small percentage that are sending 30%. So it's these large companies that are sending 30% that want to send less, and that's what this is all about. So I think that and the problem is that doesn't really affect the user that much. They haven't, they usually just keep moving they'll just keep moving the price up. They'll just make more money. So it's a good lobbying campaign. It's a good, they're kind of working through these things. Apple, of course, is going to move very, very slowly. It'll be hard to see what happens. It'll probably take years for us to know whether it actually worked or not. And what you can be guaranteed is the first apps that actually push out viruses or push out some kind of security thing will be on billboards that Apple pays for. So I think it's a hard environment to be successful in, but we'll see. We don't know.
Let's go to the next question.
Russell K. in Brooklyn, Maine writes in, I know office hours started during the pandemic, but tell us more about the history. Did most of you all work together or know one another before the show? And what is after hours?
Some basic things. Russell, thank you for the question. Let's turn to Alex, who started all of this.
Real quick, almost nobody knew each other when we started office hours. I mean, so I think we've all gotten to know each other over the last 4 years. Office hours was a mixture of, I felt like there was going to be a lot of questions about how to do virtual production, and I also needed to learn how to use Zoom, which I hadn't used, and so I figured I'll do it every day, and then I'll get good at it, and I'll be able to answer some questions, and then people that were much smarter than me in different areas all started showing up. And before we knew it, we had lots of people having this conversation. We had a lot of time to work on it. After hours is something that runs 24/7, and you can go in and ask questions. People just kind of hang out in there. You can find out more about that if you go to Office Hours officehours.global/join, get the email, and you'll see ways to get into there.
It's been an amazing journey, and thank you again, Alex, for starting this all up. I'll never forget my first stumbling into here going, this really looks interesting, and I'm bored, and I won't be bored, and I wasn't. All the things I thought I was going to have to fill the pandemic up with didn't. Instead, it was this community, and it's been so much fun. Let's see. Tuesday, July 14th, tomorrow, generative fill we're talking about. We're kind of diving a little more into these kind of generative topics. We'll talk about that on Tuesday. On Wednesday, we're going to be talking to Nathan Moody, an interactive audio designer. On Thursday, ATEM video controls. We'll guide you through that. So we have a whole bunch of topics coming up. Please join us every day if you can.